Let's see.
There we go. I started the recording.
All right, cool. All right.
Very cool.
So chapter 6, that's when you introduce your bad guy, right?
Yeah, Fish.
Yeah.
Albert J. Fish.
Now, the first thing I want to ask is why is it that in almost every instance in which he's referenced, it's his entire name?
He gets called Mr. Fish or just plain Fish a lot. Like, I think
I've noticed how many times there was a lot of instances in which his entire name is
Albert J. Fish.
Jefferson. Like it does the whole thing.
It says Jefferson on one?
Yeah.
I didn't even remember I made his middle name Jefferson. Usually, whenever it would use his whole name, it was at a moment where he was either trying to portray himself or in the scene was portrayed as someone of importance. Like, he views himself as probably the most important man in the world. Like, he views himself as the bridge into the future that is going to remake man in his image. Like, he's got a God complex. So Albert J. Fish, when he's talking about himself or when it's in a situation where he's portraying something, it's just a way of saying so important. I have to put the whole name out there. Mm. Like you're lucky he doesn't get like an Esquire or Senior or some crap like that in it.
like people don't say, people don't say Bobby. They say Robert Downey Jr.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Even though all of his family calls him Bobby.
Yeah, whenever he makes it into the news, you say the whole name because it's sort of, I don't know, almost in his case, it's almost a worshipy thing, or just like it's kind of a mix. There's the people who are like sycophantic about it. They're like, oh, Robert Downey Jr., he's so amazing. I got to say his whole name, Robert Downey Jr. It's so beautiful. And then there's just the fact that if you just put Robert, no one's going to know who the hell you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. You put Robert Downey, suddenly it's his dad.
Yeah. So you got to put Robert Downey Jr. every time. But that's a good point. It's like Arnold Schwarzenegger, or take anybody. Mm-hmm. Jennifer Lawrence. Like, no one's like, man, have you heard about Jen?
Yeah.
Jen who?
Which one? I know like 8.
So his saying of his full name and use of his full name is towards the other side, the overly important stuff.
Yeah. So like I said the other day, the way that you portrayed him, you said it was a completely different person, but I had put Elon Soros.
Yeah, Elon Soros.
Yeah. Who is it? Walter?
It's no one in particular. It's an amalgam of a lot of different people. But when I was describing him, I used I can't remember the name. Warren Buffett. A generalization of Warren Buffett because everyone thinks he's this great guy. In fact, it's very pointed, near the end of the book where Ahmed says, well, of course he's a charlatan, but everybody else believed that he was this great guy the whole time. So,
well, and the thing you said people tend to read and then when they get to chapter 10 they can't put it down or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Personally, I got a lot more interest out of this is weird. I got a lot more interest out of the book after I read chapter 6 because it put a face to the evil and something obvious to go after because it's
nebulous.
It's an issue. Like I had said the other day, like trying to write a different book entirely. Mm-hmm. I've been trying to get my grip on writing the bad guy. And I still haven't fully figured out how to do that. And so when chapter 6 gives a face to the evil, um, I was like, okay, now I know what they're really fighting.
Right,
Because
because what's her
beforehand
name?
it was like bad programming. It's just like, okay,
Bad programming, the faceless swiper, like
yeah.
just sort of the faceless. What would you use? It's sort of like the systemic problem. You know,
Mhm.
it's like you can't really point to anything in particular. It's like the system itself is somehow messed up. But then, let's see, I'm opening it up so I can remember what chapter 6 was specifically. Let's see, chapter 6 was qualified. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, this is when you actually meet him for the first time. And
Mhm.
he's sitting in his desk with the wall of touch screens that wrap around him. Like I felt the wall of touch screens that wrapped to his will was like very metaphoric of his
he
control.
he can literally reach out and touch someone.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Especially later on when it like manifests where he brings her in and he
Mhm.
shows her his wall of touch screens and like all this information.
Yeah. Yeah. So with your structure, it's like chapter 1 through 5 were basically, here's all of the information you need to know for the rest of this
Yeah.
book to make sense. 6 gave you the face. It's like, okay,
The face of evil.
here's the face of evil. 7 and 9 were a bit of a bridge. It's like, okay, here I'm connecting the face of evil to what's going to happen here. And
Hmm.
that is when you get into 10. And let's see, what did I put there? I had a note on the way that he thought about himself. He says he thinks words are baseless, and he thinks he's not a sociopath because he doesn't fit the established definition. It's like
Exactly. He
you can't do both.
he's the paradox of the way there's like this huge undercurrent that irritates the hell out of me, and it's prevalent, like in among the universities where they're like you have the moral relativism,
Mhm.
but then at the same time you have you know, it's just they can't, they want it both, like they want to
Mhm.
say this is how it is, but then they'll flip it and say, but it's not like that when you do it. You know, it's like the definitions change so fast, and he literally changes it right there. He's like, words are nonsense. Now here's my definition. You know, it's like,
Yeah, yeah,
and I make a specific reference to the French philosophers. I think I just throw it out there arbitrarily because he says,
mhm.
you know, the French philosophers were right, and then I go into the, you know, how language nests on language nests on language, it's rooted in nothing, and therefore it's nothing but a subjective, you know, it's bullcrap. Here's my definition. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
it's
that was what Peterson said when see, he said people don't like it when I call them postmodern neo-Marxists. It's like they can't be both. It's like, yeah, but they don't know that.
oh, yeah.
It's like, well, it's like that kind of puts the argument to rest. It's like, okay, it isn't that they can't do that. It's
See,
that they don't know that they can't do that.
there's a problem with postmodernism in
Mm-hmm.
general. Now you could read postmodernists and you can, you know, come to different conclusions, and a lot of them, postmodernism seems to be a codification of thinking outside of the box, which is
Mm-hmm.
ironic because codifying something is boxing it. So it's like it's within itself, it's a performative contradiction. You know, it's like it's writing a book that says there's no truth, and but they want to say that their book is the truth, and it's like you can't mesh those together well. So in and of itself it's contradictory, and which is
Mm-hmm.
fine because humans are contradictory creatures. um So that's not necessarily the problem. And it's, if you're self-aware about it when you're going through that stuff, it's not a big issue. The problem I have with it is you have like the sycophantic underclass that
Mhm.
that use it as this weird tool to get what they want, but don't actually seem to understand it in any way. It would be like I've religion in general, because it kind of falls into the weird religious archetypes. But like when I was growing up, like I would know Christians,
Mhm.
and I would talk to them because I used to be like militant atheist type, and they would say stuff, and I would like know that they're wrong, and I'd know that they're taking it out of context, and it was irritating to me. And they would use it to tell me that I was wrong about something and that I should do something else, and blah blah blah. And it's like, man, I've read more about your book than you have. And it would frustrate me. And that's kind of how dealing with a lot of the postmodernists, like I'll run up against them on Twitter. It's sort of like the same thing. They'll like tell me this stuff, and I'm like, look, I've read more of your books than you have. You're an idiot. Stop it. So
Well, it's the that's the amazing battle that goes on with folks arguing for and against Christianity, is that a lot of the arguments against Christianity are Christian arguments. It's just like, what, these people are trying to use the same models against Christianity.
well,
And
that's the thing. It's inescapable.
mhm.
Like, I think I was like listening to John Vervaeke, something or other, or it could have been Jonathan Peugeot, to be honest, because it's talking about the grammatical structure of how we interact with the world,
Mhm.
is fundamentally, inescapably religious, because a lot of it stems from religion as a belief system, and a belief system is things that you haven't been able to disprove yet, but you don't have enough information to prove them, so you believe them, right? And
Mhm.
it's sort of like the predicate to the scientific method, where the scientific method is, when functioning as intended, because there's people who take stuff on. Let's see, now I'm getting off on this whole side tangent again, but the way you come up with a hypothesis and you try to disprove it, and if you can't
Mhm.
disprove it, you send it to your peers and they try to disprove it, and then if no one else could disprove it, it's true enough. You know what I mean? So it's a belief system.
Yeah.
It's a belief
Yeah.
system.
But
Because
then they end up codifying it, and true enough isn't good enough
and
because
it becomes objective truth, and then you get into scientism, where it's the
yeah.
worship of science, and it gets in, which once again, religion, boom, you're right back to it every time.
Yeah.
So but
All
but
right. So the chapter 10. So this is we were talking about hooks a while back,
mhm.
and so I was trying to figure out if chapter 10 is a question hook or an interest hook. And um,
And 10 is ingenuity, right?
10 is,
And that's where they inject Jack with stuff.
yeah, that's that one. Um, it's I called it an interest hook because it's not making you ask the question, it's making you want it's making
Wonder
you
what's
want to
next.
want, yeah. Yeah, it's not a specific question, it's what's next. If
Yeah.
it's there's a specific question, that's a question. If it's interest, it's what's next. So but I had put Casey was invited into the building that was being raided, and an unidentified swiper was randomly killed at the end of chapter 10. And the reader is led to think Casey was killed.
Gotcha.
Because it's just
That's,
like, wait, who was that? So and Casey
yeah.
was invited in. It's like, wait, who did they just kill Casey? What's going on?
And it was very vague, and the only real description of the person, the swiper, was that they had a white lab coat on.
Mhm.
But then later on, Mario had a white lab coat on. So
Yeah.
there's no definitive. It's like you could pick up a lab coat and put it on. So yeah, it was a
Yeah.
lot of ambiguation.
the and the next chapter is with Casey, and so you're reading it like, okay, when is she gonna get into a fight
and die.
and get shot? And it's just like it doesn't happen. You're like, then who was that? Like, what's going on?
Well, it's like the 3, 4, 5 chapter transition where they're fighting Casey, and then Casey kills a bunch of people, and then they go through their scene, and then Casey kills a bunch of people. You know, it's like because it's showing the different perspectives, and so yeah.
Yeah. So after that, it was chapter 11. Yeah, was built to make the reader wonder what happened to Casey. Now, I don't know if you did that intentionally or that was just what happened. I think that was that just what happened.
I would have to say that's just what happened because the way I write is so weird. Like there's zero planning whatsoever. I think
we're very similar. You're a pants writer. You write by the seat of your pants. Yeah. There's planners and then there's pantsers, and you write by the seat of your pants.
I've heard it described as the architect and the gardener.
Yeah.
The architect plans it, and the gardener plants a seed and lets it grow.
Yeah.
And I tend
the thing that with that though is that an architect can usually get the characters more fleshed out, whereas a gardener has to get the entire thing grown and then start trimming.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So sometimes character suffers in gardening and sometimes an overarching story can usually be better if it's built. But I don't know. It depends on what I would say is it depends more on the editing than the writing.
Yeah. What bothers me about architectural writing styles is a lot of times you can't discover things that way. You know what I mean? Like let's say you sit down like I'm going to write a suspense thriller novel, and you know there's going to be the curtain, and then you know there's the first reveal, and then I'm going to have a twist, and then I'm going to have this, and then I'm going to have this, and then here's the conclusion. So it's like predetermined. Like you didn't ask yourself a question. You weren't surprised anywhere. You're the writer, you know? And it's kind of like that quote that I shared with you, I guess like last week or so, where it said, I can't remember the way it went, but it basically said the only way that you can elicit surprise from your reader is if you were surprised.
No surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. Yeah, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. Yeah.
Right. So I don't think that you can really get that as an architect. Now, it's just my theory. I don't know because I can't architect. But
I think you can, but I think it would end up feeling, what is it? Formulaic?
Yes. That's the problem I always have with architectural writing is that it becomes formulaic. Like you could spot an architectural writer because they usually have 50 books that they've written, and they're like, Bob goes on adventure, John goes on similar adventure, Andy goes on an adventure that seems quite like Adventure 1, but it's in the future. You know, it's like it becomes formulaic, and you just.
Or the lady that writes a million romance novels.
Yes,
it's just like,
exactly.
This is the same book over and over and over again with different characters.
Exactly. And it's like, I think it was Shakespeare that said there's only something like 21 or 30. I forget the number, but there's only so many plot lines. There's this many plot lines. You know what I mean? So it's like plot line is, I think an architect sits down with a plot line. And I think the gardener starts writing, and then they're like, oh, this plot line manifests organically. You know what I mean? And the two approaches
Hold on. I just got a visual. An architect sits down with a plot line, and a gardener sits over a plot.
Yeah, all the metaphor. The
What's a
plot
crow?
manifesting organically. I mean, it's just layered because,
Yeah.
it goes back to the idea of, the meaning of words. It's like we speak metaphorically no matter what. Like, how does something manifest organically from a seed? It's like all these things, fall back on each other. And
The formulaic model, there's a formula that in a formula you can have archetypes,
mhm,
and you'll usually use that. But in storytelling, it's usually called a trope.
right.
And there's an entire website dedicated to tropes.
Oh, I've been
And
there.
yeah, sometimes it can be good, but other times, like, people just treat tropes as cliches. It's just like, but if you're gardening instead of being an architect, it feels like it's not so much a cliche as this is something that legitimately
Manifest.
Yeah, that's the right word, manifest.
Yeah. I like manifestation writing over the architectural approach, definitely.
Okay, 12. 12 was the synthetic question of
What's the title?
let's see.
I
12,
could just swipe over real quick.
serendipity.
Serendipity.
Now, the reason I said synthetic question is because you're going back and forth thinking, like, where are the lines?
Oh yeah.
They're growing increasingly blurry, and then that grows in the metaphors that you're building, and then in the transference
Mm-hmm.
with the hand.
Yeah.
It blurs the line so much there is no separation.
Yeah. Like
literally.
I get, what chapter did you say that was? 13 or 12?
12.
Yeah, it's like at that point, what rails I had were gone off of. And virtually the rest of the book is off the rails at breakneck speed, like flying down the side of a mountain. And then eventually you hit a wall and it's all over. And then he's like, I don't even know what was real. And then, and because that's sort of, you'll hear that refrain several times in the book. What is real? What is real? What is real? Karen asks Kyle, what is real? Kyle asks himself, what is real? Karen asks herself, what is real? Because, like, they're trying to figure out what's real, what is reality, what is the purpose. They're trying to determine why do anything. What draws someone out of a nihilistic pointlessness, and you have to have a reason. And that was kind of one of the issues in dealing with Fish when he was saying he even says nothing matters, and he starts questioning reality by bringing in the way photons are either breaking time, space, or math. Something in it is a lie. So he's using that as leverage to get under reality and say, nothing's real anyways, therefore I don't have to adhere to morality. Like his whole
in saying that there's one lie, he's ignoring all truths.
Right.
This is
like
how do you live like that?
He's purposely destroying truth so that he's completely justified in doing the horrible things that he's doing. Like in the chapter Yellow, like Yellow was a hard chapter to write, because of what's coming down the pipe, and when they're running away from the dead child who's in the, Fish is doing some bad shit. So in order to be able to do that, you have to build mechanisms of justification that allow you to bypass your moral presuppositions and get into the pure rational, the utilitarian pure rational that says, it goes to the trolley question of how many people am I willing to kill to get what I want to get. Like he's built a justification machine for that. And I delineate it later.
It fights itself because he's talking about he's like, I'm above morals, but he keeps trying to justify it. So, well, why do you need to justify anything if you don't have any morals?
Exactly, because it's an inescapable cycle, but people like to think that they're escaping it. And it's funny to watch. Like, I have conversations a lot with this friend of mine online, and he's a lawyer, so he's good at arguing, so it's fun. And like, it was just hilarious to me because I like to throw people's crutches in their face. And one of his crutches is that he is an atheist and he knows 1,000% that God does not exist. There is nothing like that. We are just, machines moving through this, blah, 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 blah. So that's his crutch. That's his religious crutch. As long as he holds on to this, he can dismiss anything that threatens his foundations. And so we were arguing over political stuff, honestly, and he was trying to tell me about the moral whatever that this guy, and because this was immoral, therefore blah 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 blah. And then so I used the pragmatic argument of how morality forms like laws and how it's a consensus that ebbs over time. And so because he was mad that people weren't adhering to his moral presuppositions about how Trump should act. And I'm like, well, their morals have shifted because, morals are, nothing but this consensus thing that shift. And so public opinion is a representation of morals, and therefore, and then so he started trying to tell me about objective right and wrong. And like there's an absolute. And so I'd come back to him. I was like, oh, well, now you sound like a Christian. And that pissed him off. That pissed him off so bad because he wants to be right. And he's like, give me my crutch back. No. And I'm like, well, and he knows not to battle me on philosophical grounds. So he just kept dismissing, like, well, if you don't believe in right and wrong, I guess this conversation is over. Because I pulled the rug out from under him because he wants to say that there's, absolute moral authority. And I'm like, well, where does it come from? Objective reality. I'm like, what does that mean? How are you going to look at a couch and know that couch understands morality? It's freaking stupid. But anyways, huge digression.
Oh man, good digression though. Good digression.
It's just fun.
Hilarious.
It's fun to pick on him.
Okay, so here's what I wrote. After 12, after 6, I was interested. After 12, I was fully invested because that posed another question.
Of what is real.
So this is why I think that the folks that you've had read this power through it, because you have done 3 hooks in a row.
Accelerationist.
you did the interest hook of, wait, what happened to Casey? And the second hook is telling you what happened to Casey, and you're like, oh, but now what? What's going to happen after that? And then you've got the synthetic thing, and that's another question. And it's questions that are simultaneously being answered and asked, and it just keeps going.
Yeah.
So it's, like you said, accelerating. And the last chapter,
chapter 20, like the last one.
The last chapter.
Okay.
Yeah, because like I said, you'd done 3 hooks in a row, and I was fully invested. I was like, okay, now I want to know what's going on here. Mm-hmm. And I said the last chapter holds a very balanced line of good and bad feelings, kind of like the flat line that Karen had while she was in that machine. And then uh, just like at the end of her life, the story leaves a sudden, or the story just like the end of her life when they do they look at her graph,
Mm-hmm.
it suddenly has an ecstatic jump.
Yeah.
So does the story. It's flat and then an ecstatic jump right at the end on the last line.
Yeah, the very last line is like every person who I've been present for the reading of the book, and like they'll get to the last line of the last chapter, and they immediately turn to me and say something like, "What happened?" Or "Is she this? Is she that?" Or the most common one is, "I need a book too," to answer the questions. Like I've had several people want what do you call a book that comes out? A sequel.
Yeah, sequel. What? Your book?
No, here. I was listening. You were talking about his book.
Oh.
You said,
Oh.
said there was no question.
So Dad, being a pastor, he likes his alliterating triplets.
Okay.
So he came up with, because I had said those three chapters had invested me in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so it said interested, intrigued, invested.
Yeah. The alliteration. See,
And that's what happened in order.
I see where you get your eye for alliteration.
Yeah. Growing up in church with him doing that, yeah, I alliteration became a habit. Thanks, Dad.
There's so there's a ton of, how would you put it, like religious imagery almost inverted in the book, but not necessarily in a negative way. Just
you're right back to my old video.
Yeah. The inversion.
Inversion doesn't necessarily mean evil.
Right. And the inversion, and whenever I think about the inversion, because it's I don't want to say tongue in cheek. I need a term for I remove the pressure of all the historical context of these symbols and present them in more of a somewhat modernized, stripped down, fresher version that
you're recontextualizing.
Yeah, they're easier to digest. You know what I mean? It's like if
you're
you
putting it into vernacular, so people can read it properly.
And at the same time, because you remember, like, I consider it like bridging. It's a book that can bridge in people who have a predisposition to not believe in any of the old stories. You know what I mean? And so, and when Fish is laughing about KC as she screams out her Trinity up on the mechanized crucifixion, and he laughs and says, I think I shall call this the last abstraction of Christ. And then he calls himself a Serrano, and like he's going to make art out of it. And Serrano is the guy who made Piss Christ, where he put a crucifix in a jar and peed in it for a month and then took a picture of it, and it's art. It's like, what in the hell is this crap? Like, so it's sort of like it's happening, and at the same time it's getting Serranoized. I don't know. I don't really know the term for it, where it's like it's taking away its power to reveal like the purity underneath it. You know what I mean?
It's simultaneously what was those terms you used? Sublimation and ablimation. It's 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 pulling the meaning out of it at the same time it's raising it up. It's,
Transfiguration? Is that when something gets raised up?
yes,
Um,
yeah. That well,
I don't know the
no,
term well
that's
enough.
when that's I no it's not raised up. That's ascension.
Ascension to a higher level of
Yeah,
something.
transfiguration is, well, it's literally a transformation. It's a metamorphosis
Right.
of, but it's towards a good usually, because that's on in the transfiguration when Jesus turned around and they saw him, he was glowing.
Yeah. I kind of hang a hat on it at one point, the concept that I'm working with, because like Ahmed told Mario at the end of chapter 3, after he crossed himself and was very confused by the thing, and he says, "I've got God, you've got religion." You know,
Mhm.
why he's explaining why he could deal with the situation better, because you know Mario is the quintessential like half-ass Christian type that I was talking about earlier, where it's like, I know more about your book than you. And once again, that's something else that gets, delineated when Ahmed tells Mario knowingly that the poor will be with us always. And Mario, he knows what he's saying. He says, a wise man once said, but he's
Yes,
decontextualized it. So Mario doesn't know what he's saying. If he had put it in the context of who said it, Mario would have handled it differently. But Mario, being caught up in the politics of what he wants, because they were talking about UBI at the time, and he
he
wants,
made it. He said, "Oh, that sounds like Buddhist crap."
yeah, hippie bullshit or something like that, because
Yeah,
he wants to justify his belief in UBI.
yeah.
And so that's one aspect of it. And then later on, when Mario is witnessing through the blast glass, KC spread across the mechanized cross, and having her body
He
decomposed and
stops
recomposed.
here.
Yeah, he's just like,
Like he wants to cross himself to like kind of like distance himself or help himself
or
deal with what's going on here, but he can't move past here.
he can't move past his brain,
Yeah.
because it's been overthought at this point. He doesn't know what he's stuck in his brain. And then that's when Ahmed says, he takes he disconnects the symbol away
Mm.
from the meaning, and like, so it goes into the idea that symbols are kind of like language. It goes back into the nesting of language earlier, where it's like the words, they have no meaning except for the way you contextualize them metaphorically in your sentence and whatever you're saying. And that's the same thing, for the symbology of what's going on in the cross right there. And because for him, it was destroying something, and he didn't understand it. And so Ahmed basically, what would you say? He took the wind out of the sails of the ship that was of Mario, that was getting sailed into an iceberg or rock or something. You know what I mean? And he was like, they're just symbols, and you can use them for good or for evil.
Mm.
And because
Yeah, there's a lot of metaphors in that, um because it's something that bugs the heck out of me. It's like you can literally use anything both ways.
yeah,
Like I could use, I could use wax
my
wrong
wife
or
just
right.
handed me a puppy.
Oh my goodness.
It's a Anatolian Shepherd, but this one's all white. Is this
See, it's got the brownie.
is this Alexa's?
No, that's the female. Sorry, didn't mean to click on it.
I don't think he clicked anything.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we got how many? 7?
9.
9 puppies?
Hi.
Trying to show you
The face.
see the browning coming in?
He's Sable.
Yeah, the sable.
And that's the girl or the boy?
This should be the girl. Yeah. No penis.
Did you hear her?
No. What?
She said no penis. She was trying to determine if it was male or female.
Yeah.
That's how you determine. But I guess we should ask the puppy's pronouns. They're
Oh,
babies.
dear.
Might have a little.
Yeah.
He's hard to tell. That's Versace. Or Alexa.
My daughter named him Versace.
Versace.
Well, last time we had this is like the second litter from this mom and dad. And we had an all white one, and she loved it, and she named it Bougie. So she wanted to stay in the theme of bouginess, so she named him Versace. Just, I don't know, just silly naming mechanism, or not mechanisms. Yeah, the people who bought Bougie kept his name, and I don't think they knew what it meant, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, it was.
Well, I guess uncontextualized, bougie sounds like a dog name.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You realize it's short for bourgeoisie, right?
Yeah. It's like, well, it's like boxer.
Yeah.
It's like, he doesn't have hands. He's not going to be boxing. Just sounds like a dog's name.
We were deep into the analysis of the metaphors going on towards the end of the book.
Yeah. I was talking about how literally anything can be used wrong.
Oh yeah, anything, exactly. Like symbols are ultimately, they get turned into tools.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like that's what I was talking about when like everything was stripped away and you could kind of view the purity at the heart of the symbol, like what it's supposed to be. Once you've pulled off all the scrap metal that's accumulated on it over the years to portray it as what they want it to be, and then in all that stripped away, and then you're like, this is what it actually is. And like one of the ideas, and that is, I remember growing up, I felt like, okay, this is actually a joke in South Park, okay?
Okay.
And it works out great because I had this theory before South Park ever made this joke, and this is an example of a symbol being used improperly. And anyways, in the South Park, Cartman takes old Barry White music, takes out every place where Barry says baby, and replaces it with Jesus, and releases it as Christian music. And the idea is, because it's Christian music, it has a set audience that will buy it because it's Christian. You know what I mean? Like it has an automatic audience.
Yeah.
And so it's an example of the symbol being like accreting other stuff and being used like exploitatively. And ultimately, go ahead.
So recently, have you seen Peugeot stuff recently?
Give me an idea.
He talked to another writer.
Oh yes, I did. I listened to that.
Yeah, on metal.
Yes, the symbology of, or no. I can't say this word. Atropomorph. The thing where Halloween, where you use evil to
scaring away the dark spirits. That
gargoyles.
Kind of idea. Yeah.
Musical gargoyles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That turned me on to Striper. I was like, I didn't know about Striper. I had no idea.
That's hilarious.
And so I'm looking up Striper, and I look over to the side, and there's a Razor Fist video.
About Striper?
About Striper. I was just like, Razor covered Striper? Okay.
Like it's synchronicity.
Yeah, so I watched that, and I started listening to the music, and I think
they grew on you, huh?
Well, they're great, but I've got like what? Let's see. Of their entire thing, I've got like 10 songs that I like because I systematically went through their albums. But
I
but
don't know any Striper. That's before my time. Aren't they like an 80s hair band or something?
kinda, I guess. But the only two of their songs I would
Categorized Christian.
listen to over and over again.
Hmm.
No, they're all Christian outside of the weird love ballads that
Yeah.
were kind of out of place. But he literally he said that. Razor said that. He said if they replaced God with the devil and Jesus with baby, they would have been they would have been the most popular band
Right.
of their time. But instead, they went with their faith.
Right.
And
Which ostracized them in the milieu because everyone was like, Satan is everything. Ah!
Well, on
Oh man, that part where Rockio, the writer guy, he was talking about this band that he can't remember the name of, and I don't know. I don't really know this story, but it cracked me up because I know this crap is true. They wanted to know how better to blaspheme about God, so they went and studied and it converted. I cracked up so bad.
That sounds like somebody I know.
Because there's this when I was younger, I used to listen to deicide a lot. In deicide, a deity, and then side means to kill. Like, so obviously they have their
yeah,
whatever, they wear it on their sleeve. And so I just remember, like, when I was really young, like I was big into Satan and all that stuff, just like your typical rebellious child, and like you didn't
edgy
know,
teenager.
yeah, and it didn't mean anything to you. And then I was probably still in my teens, like all this stuff transitioned really fast before I hit my 20s. I decided, I was like, well, I didn't believe in any of it. I was atheist. And so therefore Satan music was silly to me too. I was like, oh, okay, you guys are just, inverted Christians. Y'all are worshiping the same twin deities of
and the upside down cross thing. It's like they have no idea what that means.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just like that's not evil. That's just how someone else was crucified.
Yeah.
And it was because he wanted to honor
right.
Jesus. He said, I can't be crucified the same way he was, just turn me upside down.
Yeah, and so it's exactly, and so you'll have these like, you'll still see it today. Like there's this one band called like Dimmu Borgir or something like that. And I just heard one song of theirs, and I remember thinking, I'll look at it. And then so I pulled up some images of him, and he's like in like this lavish, borderline homoerotic costume with a gigantic cross necklace hanging inverted on his chest, and I'm just like, God, what are you, 14?
It's just Peter.
Yeah. I can't take it seriously when I see it. But anyways,
yeah.
Back to deicide. I remember I was reading about him. I was like, what in the hell? Why are they? This guy's like 40s now or something. Why is he still Satan music? And so they were talking about why they sing about this, and they're like, they do it just to blaspheme against Christianity because they don't believe in it, and they're technically atheists. And I'm like, but your whole life is about fighting. If you're fighting it, like, don't you realize you're subservient to it?
Yeah. This is the argument that I've had. It's just like an anti-theist is not a true atheist.
Yeah,
because you wouldn't care.
you wouldn't.
You wouldn't care. You'd just be going about your life.
Yeah, it is always weird to me when, yeah. Anyways, so yeah,
Yeah.
there was a lot of, in the later chapters, stripping symbology down to its cores and allowing it to, I think, be reclothed. Like because everything had there was so much accretion of, even right down to Satanists wearing inverted crosses. That's associated with the cross now. That has superseded Peter
Yeah.
for the average, dipshit trying to understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a part of it now. And then so when you see KC up on the cross being stripped of her humanity in a very literal sense and being reclothed with synthetics.
Well, even that, it wasn't fully it wasn't fully a crucifixion because you had put it into a Vitruvian.
Yeah. It's not a full crucifixion. And then she becomes, for all intents and purposes, the devil of the story. You know what I mean? Because, and this is what's crazy, because a lot of this stuff, I did not know it when I wrote it. Like,
she's a constructed Satan.
She's a constructed Satan. But there's like a lot of this weird symbology that I discovered after writing this. It blows my mind because I didn't know it at the time. But I watched Pajot's video on the symbolism of 666 and how 666 comes to mean trying to fit everything precisely into a category, and like so it becomes a stultifying tyranny that becomes so rigid that it must collapse. Like that's what 666 represents. Well, the Kinju, when it crawls down off the cross and basically becomes the demon, it assimilates Barry right away. And then like their fear is that this will never stop. It's going to assimilate everything, and so it literally became 666 right there. It's like this mindless beast is going to assimilate everything into the perfect order of its body. Well, perfect in its mind.
Well, with such order comes dualisms, because there's always a contradiction at the margin. But the thing that I've been running into since Peterson is I keep running into those situations of why can't it be both, and that was when I brought up the straight spring. But I was looking for my Kindle because I wanted to be able to read some digital books on a trip, but I came across this in the
what's it say? Recapture the Wesley visions, the Wesleys.
Yeah, the Wesley brothers, that they have people kind of try to reduce their theology down to, oh, it's all grace. It's like, well, that's not their mission. What they were trying to do is they were trying to
I think reductionism, it might be one of the most destructive things with information that humans do. Now reductionism functions. It becomes a thing because it's impossible to deal with combinatorial explosion, which goes back to the idea of belief. You believe something that hasn't been disproven because it's impossible to prove it, right? Now the problem with reductionism is it becomes this weird codification where you think you know everything because you cut everything away that doesn't fit, and you think that you've reduced it to an absolute. And it's like, no, you've abstracted the hell out of so much stuff. Like for instance, you see a graph that tracks the movement of something over X amount of years, right? But if you take that line out and you repopulate in the dots, it's like there's like this haze of dots all over the place, massive outliers over here, and it's like,
Yeah.
and then they take the average of them and draw a line through it, and you're like, that is not what happened. That line is bullshit.
Yeah, that line is not what actually goes on in the world.
Right. And that reductive, propensity in humans, it works in certain cases, but when you take a reductive point of data out of this field of dots and correlate it with another point out of another field of dots, and then you build a model and algorithmically project the future out of reductionism, it's like, no freaking wonder you guys can't figure anything out. Like nothing adds up. There was this, I can't remember what it's called right now, and it happened, I think, in the 80s. I've been reading lots of Nassim Taleb, so I get his way of thinking really well, but his individual examples, I can't ever remember the names of shit. But there was this program where these people, once it's reductive programming of data mining, and they reduced the data, all this stuff, and they built a projective model, and it was going to be the model that was the end of going bust, boom and bust in the economic cycle. And all these people adhered to it, and it heralded one of the worst crashes, where more money was lost in a single day than any other in the history of crashes. So reductivism is terrible when abused.
Yeah, it comes to the tool analogy again. It can be used properly, or it can be abused. The abuse tends to happen when you start to do reduction and loss of context. If you keep reduction within context, people know where to go.
Right.
If you take reduction out of context, suddenly it just becomes a trope. And
reductionism is the act of removing context, though.
No, well, okay, yes, and no. It's I'm trying to do the Wesley thing. It's both and. Because if you reduce it, if you reduce something to an easier digestible thing while still citing the original, it can cause growth. That's why a lot of the stuff with Peterson is growing.
If you're using
if like say a university and you don't cite, suddenly you've just got information and it's a statement.
Right. It's got to tie back to it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to think of a way to put it. Like, great example. That's really weird. Like, when I leave myself notes, like if I'm at the gym or I'm on a treadmill or doing something where I can't sit down and put the entire digestion of my thought, I'll write something that will capture the completeness of my thought in a reductive way. And I had this note that I wrote down in my phone that literally said Panda Hitler. Exactly.
What?
Exactly, because you can never extract the thoughts out of that short thing unless you're me, because it was so off the wall that I would remember it, and it had to do with the flow, the way people perceive Darwinism as functioning versus actuality, and along with a lot of other things. Like, people have this view of time and evolution, and I use evolution very loosely for everything: the evolution of ideas, the evolution of cars, not just animals, but it's the idea that if evolved, it must have been the right answer. You know what I mean? Like people have this perception that
Yeah,
and that time
where
moves
they're
slowly.
disregarding any chance.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, that they think that chance is the selecting God. You know what I mean? It's like some things happened, and
Yeah, but
through
chance can't
chance,
select.
I know. That's what I'm saying. There's all these misperceptions. It's like chance produced these things, and then survival of the fittest killed off these.
Mm-hmm.
But it also produced the panda, which is a giant bear that lives off only bamboo.
Yeah.
That was a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so is the
Fail.
koala.
Yeah.
Which is the same thing, only it lives in the tree it tries to eat, and it
Right.
would be in the same tree for the majority of its life. It's like, why?
And you cannot convince me that nature was like, all right, I got a good one. The sloth. Hey, look out. No,
all these bear-like creatures.
Yeah, they're
that are useless.
Yes. So you have these things that are maladapted, but they got lucky.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just so happened, and then there's also the idea that people have the perception of Darwinism moving in like this slow, exacting line. Remember, like here's the dot field, and then here's the line that tracks through it. Like they think the line tracking through it is reality, but there's a massive dot field of what actually happened, and something might evolve in a great leap, and they can't track it, And it's like I digressed to the point. I forgot what I was talking about.
That's the Cambrian explosion.
Right.
Is like where did all of this come from?
Right. And
we have nothing to explain this giant explosion of things that came out of one worm?
Yeah. And so we applying the idea of Darwinism, the idea of survival of the fittest, the thing that excels and rises to the top is the thing that is most fitted for dealing with the environment. That's sort of the idea, the reductive idea of it. And so then, therefore, the person who rises to the top of the political spectrum is the one best suited for it, because you have, the invisible hand of the market of popular opinion selecting him, right? Well, then how do you explain Hitler? It's like, it doesn't work. So you got pandas and you have Hitlers, two things that were selected by their environment that were not good adaptations for it.
Yeah, that were terrible adaptations.
That were terrible adaptations for it.
And I think we can segue this. We didn't record our conversation that got fantastic, because I really wish we had, because restating what we had said seems like repetition to us, but when you were going through the line stuff, I'm just and the and what actually happens, I went to the Wesley thing and the bad adaptations, and it's like it went back to the straight spring and the cones of possibility. So why don't you start with the cones? The cones of possibility, because they here's you would have to go to the outside of the cone. This will be explained after you explain the cones for anybody watching this. You'd have to be on the outside of the cone the entire time to get Panda Hitler.
Yes, that's precisely it. Okay.
Yeah.
The cones. The dream happened from the second book I was writing, and whenever I get deep into a book, it starts manifesting crazy dreams. And the dream I had was I was standing, like not standing, like suspended in some sort of abyss, whatever. And I'm standing there like the Vitruvian Man. And behind me is a cone, and it's dark in coloration, and it terminates like between my shoulder blades in the middle of my back. I guess roughly where the heart would be is where it terminates. And within the cone, you see all the histories, all the existences, all the lives, all the adaptations, all the events, everything that culminated to produce me exactly. You know, so you have the evolution of from animals into this and humans, and you know the choices made and the mating partners that produced this whatever that moved on, and then like, you know, inventions and history. Just it I guess you could say it was a visualization of history and everything that you can imagine coming to a point. And then that's me. I'm the product of this. And then erupting from my chest was a white cone, and it was unpopulated, and it represented potential. And the potential is necessarily limited by my history, right? And it's like an hourglass, and it passes through me. And the decisions that I make within the cone of possibility determine how the cone of history is built. And then the cone of history necessarily limits the cone of possibility. So if you make several bad decisions, your graph is going down, and therefore you can never aim as high as you could previously because you have destroyed a certain amount of your potential. And every moment that passes, you're destroying a certain amount of potential, but
you're narrowing and warping the cone.
Right, as you pass through it. So if you use your potential properly and you ascend into the cone, you're moving towards a better place. And if you're wasting your potential, you're moving down through the cone. And then
could you give me sharing permissions? Because I want to. Well, it's on our. You could probably share it on yours. It's on our chat in Twitter. The visualization of the cones intersecting.
The video?
No, the picture of
because I got Twitter open.
The gyre. Is that how you pronounce it? Gyre. Yeah.
Yeah, let me see if I can rotate my phone.
Because it's a visual.
Is that coming through?
Yeah, it's a visual representation of, you know, you can even see it squiggling.
Yeah.
It's a visual representation of what we're talking about from the side. If you imagine it three-dimensional, it's got a lot more potential to it, but this is just a picture. So,
right.
But that segues into what we were talking, what my part of that conversation was, which was the straight spring.
Yeah, I like the spring a lot.
And if you want some visual context to these those videos that I shared with you, it's Which Way Is Down is features cones, and he actually has a ribbon that he puts on the cone to show that even a straight line is curving around the cone, and the straight spring came from the Wesleyan practice of both and that I didn't even know I was doing. and I was thinking, like, the Eastern and Western concepts of time, of like Western is it's a straight line, it's got a beginning and an end. It's like, this is all gonna end someday. And the Eastern is a whole lot of cycling.
Yeah.
and some would say it will continue to cycle forever. Some would say it terminates in nirvana or something. It depends on who.
Nirvana is not a termination of the cycle. It's escaping the cycle.
Yeah, it's an escape of the cycle. But so it depends on who you ask.
Right.
But to be reductionistic, say so it's like a forever cycle and then a point A to point B.
Right.
So it's like, well, why can't it be both? And that didn't make sense to me, because like, why would I have that thought? Why would I even have that thought? So, well, because I'm trying to reconcile two sides. Like, okay, so what could come out of reconciling these two sides?
Yeah.
Well, so then so the concept of the straight spring, you think of a second, okay? And that second, each moment within that second that is similar to the moment before it is a point at which this coil comes back around each time. Yep. And so you expand that to a minute, and you take that, and that's all coiled around, and an hour, and that's all coiled around, and a day, a month, a year. It expands entirely, and that goes to the video, How the Earth Moves. If you look at how the Earth moves through the universe,
space, yeah,
you can see a line of, here's the sun, and you draw a line from where the sun is now and where the sun will be. It looks like a straight line. It's like, okay, that's neat and all, but look at the Earth. You draw a line from where the Earth is on that same line with the sun, you've got a coil going around through space. Around. I was like, oh my gosh. And then you had said, who said it? Who said it rhymes?
Oh, Mark Twain.
Mark Twain. History does not repeat, it rhymes. And I heard that, and it's like everything made sense, because when
clicked into place,
the years or times in which things seem like it's happened before or it's extremely similar, the coil is coming back around. Deja vu. The deja vu that we have in history is not the same thing happening. It's the rhyming of the coil coming back around to the same point. And that's at which the two events are the closest.
Because you can trace cyclic events through history that are somewhat repetitious, because humans, they can only learn so much from their history. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's when we got into the discussion of when I was might have been on a previous thing, but there was the discussion of how the right wing is kind of like a bad dog owner, and the left wing is like an ill-mannered dog running in a circle around him, the right,
that's what you said at the end of the last video. Yeah.
They're trying to march towards a place, but you got the other one going squirrel, 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 running around it, and they create like the cycle. So you have the cycle of, Martin Luther King wanting to be judged by the content of her character, and now it's cycled back around to the thing he wanted to escape, and people are like, we want to judge you by your immutable characteristics, and your character doesn't matter. We want to organize by intersectional values, and it's like, but
that's literally the opposite of what he said.
Yeah, you guys have gone full circle.
Mm-hmm. But even though it's cycling, you zoom out, it's still a straight line.
Yeah.
And so that's why
the spring. When you look at it from the side, it's a line. When you look at it from the front, it's the circling cycle. That's why it's called the straight spring. Yeah.
It's like it's straight because you you can look back at it and see distance. But like you said, if you turn it, it's like, this is how it's described as God seeing time, is that he sees all of time at the same time. It's like he can see the whole thing. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
well, how would that look? Well, you look through a spring, you can see
Spring.
all the way to the end.
So the book itself, to go back to what we were talking about, like the metaphors, like it's really loaded with a lot of symbological metaphors that can be taken a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And
Of which I had questions about the tree, but
it's very
let's start
kaleidoscopic.
at
Well, I was going to go
at,
to the tree.
Let's start at Jacob, or is it Jacob? What's his name?
Kyle?
No, the guy that dies.
Jack.
Jack. So let's start at Jack's like the beginning of when he was injected. Explain that to me, because I was lost.
Okay.
Because he was seeing things.
He was seeing a lot of things. I think one of the most important symbological turns, though, is when Jack lost his hand and Kyle went to retrieve his hand and put it in the jar with the synthetic blood. He opened the compartment on his backpack, because remember his backpack is an aerodrome for little drones. So it's not for carrying stuff. So it only has a small compartment for actual storage. And he goes to put it in there, but it's full of Casey's disassembled drone. Because remember, they had collected her drone, and they were going to use it to track it back to her, find her, and kill her because of what she had done in the belly of the centrifugal colony when she opened up her guns on all those homeless people.
Yeah.
And he pulls the drone material out. So he's basically like, that's the first step of forgiveness or something. You know what I mean?
Discarding the event, or discarding the content of the event.
Yeah. And then he puts Jack's hand in there. But what was even more interesting is Jack's hand was in the belly of a beast. So
yeah, it was.
It was a miniature and accidental. When I noticed it, it was like one of those, like, mind blown moments. I was like, Kyle rescued his father from the belly of the beast, because Kyle didn't really have a dad, and
he's got this father figure, and
right. So Kyle, rescued his father figure from the belly of a beast. I just thought it was really weird. So he gets it out of there, he puts it in there, and at the same time, he takes the first step in forgiving Karen, or KC, by jettisoning the disassembled drone.
Yeah.
So there was that. Like that. When I found that part, when I was editing, and I saw what had happened there, like that was mind blowing for me. And then you're talking about where they're laying him on the table, and he starts seeing Ahmed as a tree.
No, the tree. Well, I don't know. Did he? Because I was very confused as to what was going on. The tree was at the end.
The
when they
tree
were rising up through the.
The tree is at the end. That's a major tree, but there's also another tree.
Was there a reference earlier?
Yeah, there's a reference to a tree in like 13, 14, or 15, where they have Jack laying on a table, and he starts hallucinating, and he looks up at the thing. Uh-oh, our power just went out.
All right. Sorry about that. The power went out at Voth's place, so he and I are going to finish that particular conversation at a later date. So tune in for part 2 pending.